All right, let's talk Miami Dolphins. Obviously, there's a lot of news in Miami involving one particular veteran player that's been floating around. But when it comes to the players that are going to be on this Dolphins teams going forward, there is one rookie that's making a strong impression on everyone. We've got a great report out in Miami. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. The Jalen Ramsey overhang with this Miami Dolphins squad is obvious. And look, by the time you watch this video, maybe it's already been resolved, but it's very clear the Dolphins are going to move on from Jalen Ramsey, or at least it appears that they will, which means they're going to go very young at the cornerback position. Fortunately for Miami, there's one draft pick they added this offseason that is off to a very impressive start. Let's get into the article. Then we've got some very interesting data on this kid on the other side. This report is courtesy of Dolphins Wire. Miami Dolphins rookie Jason Marshall Jr. is making good first impressions in the early stages of organized team activities. He's a big corner. He moves really well, and he's super efficient and productive mover. Dolphins cornerback Matthew Rajo said last week. Cornerbacks coach, excuse me, Matthew Rajo said last week. So as a big corner, being able to get your hands on and still keep your feet under you, that allows you to cover a big variety of receivers. What he's doing a great job of in this offseason is the things that we pinpointed throughout his college career that we want to improve on, and we can make adjustments to get them to be super productive. That's what we're working on right now. So we're talking about a very coachable kid. He had some flaws. Obviously, wasn't like a top 10 pick or anything. And he's improving on the fall on those flaws, according to the Dolphins coaching staff. Great start, obviously, there. Marshall has also caught the eye of cornerback room veteran and leader slot specialist Cater Kohu. Man, he's a baller, Kohu said of Marshall. He's quiet. He comes every day ready to work. He's like a sponge. He's always taking notes and stuff like that. He's big, athletic, and he has a chance to be a really good player. So it's very clear that Jason Marshall Jr. coming out of college had a lot of physical tools, was a bigger corner, 6'1", 200 plus pounds. Had an injury his senior season at Florida. A lot of great physical tools, a lot of potential. The question mark coming into the draft was, can he grow? Can he develop? And if you listen to the Dolphins coaching staff and their veterans, they believe he already is growing and improving on a lot of those flaws, which is a great sign for Miami. What's very interesting, though, is that there are basically two cornerbacks in this draft class that fit this mold. SEC corner, a lot of experience, injuries their last year in college, great physical tools. One was, of course, Jason Marshall Jr., and the other one was Maxwell Hairston, who actually would be a first-round pick in the past NFL draft a few weeks ago. And when you look at the data comparing these two kids, it looks very interesting. Let's go ahead and pull up this the first chart we have here, comparing Marshall Jr. versus his comp, Maxwell Hairston. These grades here are courtesy of PFF. Again, this is their senior year in college. Overall, defensively, you've got Jason Marshall in blue, and we got Hairston in red. Overall, defensively, Marshall was better. You can look at those numbers. You can see it on the screen. Run defense, better. Tackling, better. Coverage, better. Across the board, Marshall Jr. was a better football player his last year in college than Maxwell Hairston. Marshall Jr. was not a first-round pick. Obviously, he was selected in the 5th round. Hairston was a first-round pick. So you would expect a massive delta against Jason Marshall Jr. Not so. Actually, Jason Marshall Jr. was significantly better. I think that's a sign that Dolphins got themselves a really good football player, especially now that he's overcoming his flaws. But if you go deeper into the advanced analytics comparing these two, it gets even better for Jason Marshall Jr. So we're going to go to our next chart here to talk about one of my favorite stats. It's pass breakups per target, that percentage. So if you're targeted 100 times as a corner and you break up the pass physically, you bat it down 10 times, that's a percentage of 10%. That's basically how I look at this data is how often you make the play. How often, because sometimes a receiver will drop a ball, sometimes the quarterback will throw a bad pass, but if it's a good ball, if it's on target, how often do you make a play? Over the course of their careers, this is comparing their aggregate careers now in the SEC, both these guys, Jason Marshall Jr.'s pass breakup per target percentage was a little over 11. Maxwell Hairston was a little over 8. That's a significant gap right there. Again, Jason Marshall Jr. proving himself to be the better football player. But how about another statistic just to round this whole thing out? Let's go to our final chart here. This is catch percentage allowed, right? Because if you look at the pass breakup per target, people that don't like that data, they say, well, if you're a hyper-aggressive corner and that's say you're jumping every single route to break it up, but you give up a bunch of catches because you're so aggressive, it really doesn't work out well for your team. So I looked into the catch percentage allowed, and Jason Marshall Jr. had a significantly lower catch percentage allowed, which is what you want. You want to give up fewer catches if you're a corner than Maxwell Harris did. So no matter what data you look at, the PFF grades, when you look at their pass breakup, their playmaking ability, and when you look at the number of receptions they allowed, and remember, once again, this is over the course of their entire SEC careers, comparing Jason Marshall Jr. to Maxwell Harrison, Jason Marshall Jr. is better than the first round pick. Now, obviously, there's other reasons he slid. I think kind of silly reasons, testing, things like that. Maybe certain fits that people see better out of Maxwell Harrison than they did out of Marshall. But it's very clear the Dolphins got a lot of value when they selected this guy in the 5th round, and that value is showing itself out very early in OTAs, making a strong impression. And everyone always throws that caveat out there. Well, it's early. What does it really matter? In a position the Miami Dolphins are in where they're going to have to go young at corner, strong starts matter because impressive starts lead to impressive results through OTAs, impressive results during training camp, impressive results during the preseason, and then you're ready to go week 1. At the cornerback position, it is critically important for these young Dolphins corners to start fast and start well, and Jason Marshall Jr. is doing just that. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Dolphins fans in the comment section below, as you look across the NFL landscape and you look at what the Dolphins right now are trying to at least reportedly do when it comes to Jalen Ramsey, what would you want in return for a theoretical trade of Jalen Ramsey? Are you looking to just get rid of him for something? You just want him off the team? You're just looking to move beyond it. You'll take whatever you can get. Or is there a certain pick that you need to have? Like you have to get, I'm making this up here, but you're going to have to get at least a 3rd round pick for him. Otherwise, you want to hold on to him. What do you want the Dolphins to get for Jalen Ramsey? Give us your thoughts on that situation in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. What are your thoughts on Jason Marshall Jr. and everything with this Dolphins secondary?
Yeah, like I think Jason Marshall Jr. is very intriguing to me, and I think the Dolphins being able to grab this guy is a good move. But the first thing that jumps off the page to me, excuse me, is that this guy is seasoned. If you look at what he did in the SEC, we're talking about Florida Gators play a very tough schedule in the SEC. He's going up against the best competition, so that's one thing people say. All right, NFL game is way different than college, and it is undoubtedly. And I hate the argument where people are like it's early or he's just out of college. What else are we supposed to compare at this point? All we can compare is what we can compare. So in the SEC, I'd say that's the highest level of college football competition. Day in and day out, you're getting the best guys. So this is a guy in Marshall Jr. who at Florida played over 2,400 snaps. He had about average 600 snaps per season. So this is a guy who is very seasoned. He started all 4 years at Florida from 2021 to 2024. Went through a lot of different offensive looks. This is a guy who's been on the field and just he's gotten his, sometimes you see a guy and, he kind of bounced around his first 3 years, didn't really do anything. Then he pops that final year and gets a lot of playing time. That's a guy who I think is good, but you don't get the seasoned veteranness of a guy like Marshall. You don't have a guy who has been on the field for 4 years straight, being able to go up against offenses all the time. I think it makes a difference. Practice makes perfect. If there's someone that's naturally gifted at something, if you gave them 4 straight years to work on that craft, they'd be way better than the first year that they were doing it. So I think that's something to me that jumps off the page early looking at Marshall is a guy who has a lot of time under his belt. So if you bring in a young guy and you're wanting to bring in a young guy to replace or help replace a guy that was as talented as Jalen Ramsey, you want someone with experience. You don't want a guy that's fresh, that's going to make a ton of mistakes, who's going to be new to the situation. You want a guy that feels like he may have been there a little bit. So that's what I see from Marshall. A lot of snaps played at the highest level of football over the course of 4 years in Florida. I think that's really important. But the other things you bring up as well is this guy seems like a playmaker. He seems like he's got the physical tools to be really good. I think probably a big part of the reason why he fell in the draft is he missed the entire last half of that season after the injury against Kentucky in week 8. So this is a guy I think a little undervalued, a little underrated. So coming in here, if he's starting out making good impressions on his DB coach, doing really good things early on, I think you got to feel good about that because when this guy's a playmaker, he's shown it in his pass breakup percentage. He's shown what he's able to do on the field. He's shown that he's a veteran. He's got a lot of snaps under his belt for a college player. He's played in the SEC, started for 4 straight years. He was able to do that. That's something in itself that you need to, tip your cap to him a little bit there. Then on top of that, he's already showing out, doing well in mini camps, in OTAs, just through this offseason program. This is the guy you got to feel good about. I think Jason Marshall Jr. looks like a good fit for Florida. The stats are backing it up. Him versus a first round pick. He shows you why this guy is talented. He's a lot of great stats on his side as well. But just everything's pointing towards this was a solid pickup for the Dolphins. And this is giving you some comfort, some clarity in if you have to make a big decision, like moving on from Jalen Ramsey, this can be a guy that can step in and at the very least not make mistakes, not do a bad job. I think he'll inevitably do a good job. I think he'll be a solid corner for the Dolphins. But this is a guy who's got a lot of experience under his belt, and I don't think he's going to fumble things from the beginning. I think he's going to be a very solid person to step in and take over the role for the Dolphins.
Yeah, you talk about that experience. One of the things that can happen in college, especially because collegiate, the way the game is played is completely different. Because if you look at the hash marks, right, the college game is completely different than the NFL. The hash marks are significantly wider, which means whereas the NFL is much more constrained, the wide side of the field in college can be incredibly wide, which means it's incredibly difficult sometimes to play corner. You are literally on an island. So a lot of times what happens is these DBs in college, these cornerbacks that are mainly on the outside, they get put in a lot of bad situations. They get put in one-on-one things where they're basically by themselves with nothing but grass. It becomes a very tough situation. And you look at a guy in Jason Marshall Jr. that from day one, when he arrived at the University of Florida at Gainesville, that's all he did was play on an island in those outside corners. Of the 2,400-ish snaps he took at the collegiate level, 2,200 of them were at that wide corner position. This is a guy who can play on an island. Like you said, he faced great competition. He is seasoned. He is experienced. Going into the NFL ranks, this is not a guy who was a nickel corner in college, who played with a lot of help, who played against inferior competition. He was going up against a lot of first, second, third round receivers, NFL guys, week in and week out, all 4 years. He was going into a lot of these games on an island, playing that wide corner situation that a lot of corners in the collegiate game have to get used to. He will slide in and contribute right away from Miami if needed. Now, will it be absolutely perfect? Of course not. There will be some ups and downs anytime you play any rookie, especially a fifth rounder coming off an injury like Jason Marshall Jr. But the reality is there are very few defensive backs in the entire class that are as game ready today coming out of the draft than Jason Marshall Jr. And I think that's why the Dolphins picked him up. Obviously, the fact he slid into the fifth round, there are flaws, there are issues. He's far from a perfect prospect. But the fact that he's addressed some of those flaws, it's clear the Miami Dolphins during the evaluation process, when you listen to their coaching staff say, hey, here are these 3 things he needs to work on. We selected him. We told him, hey, work on these 3 things. And he's improving in those areas. So we're talking about a guy that was drafted as a fifth round because he had some flaws, and he's already solved a lot of those flaws. So just by doing that by itself, he's basically become, I'll say, a 4th or 3rd round value already. Plus, he's a great fit for what Miami needs, right? So Jason Marshall Jr. will slide in and address a critical area for Miami. Again, we're assuming they move off of Jalen Ramsey. That situation at the time of this recording has yet to be resolved. But the reality is this was a really great pickup by Miami. And let's give a lot of credit to the Dolphins coaching staff here. They drafted him knowing they'd have to fix some things, and they've already gone out and aggressively fixed them. But let's also give some credit for Jason Marshall Jr. He appears to have a great head on his shoulders, smart kid, working hard, putting in the time, rapidly improving. One of the things we talk about all the time on this channel is that we look at some of these players and prospects as if it's a Madden video game, right? Your rating is on a scale of like 1 to 100. If you're an 80 player, that's what you are. That's who you are forever. The reality is players, even in the NFL, they get better. They improve in the offseason. So they may have drafted a guy who was let's say he was a 70, he's already an 80. We'll see if he gets better and better. He could become a very quality top end player for Miami. Again, it's early, a lot of practices to be done, a lot of football to be played, but so far so good for the Miami Dolphins and Jason Marshall Jr.